Imagine a life of absolute luxury, where every need is met before you even ask. That was Moses' reality growing up in the grand palaces of Egypt. Raised as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, he had access to the finest education, the wealth of the empire, and the respect of an entire nation. But beneath the golden ornaments and the lavish feasts, there was a secret, a truth that would change his destiny forever. Moses was not an Egyptian. He was a Hebrew, one of the very people suffering under the cruel oppression of Pharaoh's rule. As Moses grew older, this truth began to weigh heavily on his heart. He saw his people forced into brutal labor, beaten by Egyptian taskmasters, treated as less than human. And then came the moment that changed everything. One day, he witnessed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Anger and justice surged through his veins, and in a moment of uncontrollable impulse, he struck the Egyptian down, killing him. Panic set in. He had just crossed a line that could never be undone. He tried to hide the body, but news of what he had done spread quickly. Pharaoh himself sought his life. With no other choice, Moses fled. He left behind the riches, the power, and the prestige of Egypt, escaping into the barren wilderness of Midian. There, stripped of his former identity, he became a simple shepherd. Years passed. The mighty prince of Egypt was now tending sheep in the desert, living in obscurity, forgotten by the world. But he was not forgotten by God. One day, as he led his flock near Mount Horeb, he saw something strange, a bush engulfed in flames, yet not burning. As he approached, a voice called out to him, a voice that would change the course of history. "Moses, Moses!" It was the voice of God. And there, in the midst of the wilderness, barefoot before holy ground, Moses received the mission of a lifetime to return to Egypt and lead his people to freedom. But Moses was hesitant. How could a mere shepherd confront the most powerful man in the world? He argued with God, listing all his weaknesses, his lack of eloquence, his fear, his past failures. Yet God had chosen him. And when God chooses, he equips. Armed with nothing but a staff and divine assurance, Moses set out on the journey that would make him one of the greatest leaders in history. This was the beginning of an extraordinary story, one that would prove that no past mistake, no fear, and no human limitation can stand in the way of God's plan. Moses, the fugitive turned shepherd, was now standing in the very place he had once fled, the grand palace of Pharaoh. But this time, he was not there as a prince of Egypt. He was there as a messenger of the Almighty, carrying a demand that would shake the empire to its core. "Let my people go." His voice echoed through the golden halls, a direct challenge to the most powerful ruler in the world. Pharaoh, seated upon his lavish throne, adorned in the finest garments, looked down at Moses with a mix of amusement and disdain. To him, Moses was nothing more than an aging exile, a forgotten relic of the past. And his demand, preposterous. Why would Pharaoh, ruler of the greatest civilization on earth, release an entire workforce of Hebrew slaves, the very foundation of Egypt's economy, simply because of a plea from an outcast? His response was swift and arrogant. "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Moses and his brother Aaron knew this would not be easy. God had already warned them that Pharaoh's heart would be hardened. This was not just a political battle, it was a spiritual war. Pharaoh saw himself as a god, and he would not submit to a power he did not recognize. But God was about to make his presence known in a way Egypt had never seen before. To prove that he spoke on behalf of the Almighty, Moses performed the first miraculous sign. At God's command, Aaron cast down his staff, and before Pharaoh's very eyes it transformed into a serpent. Gasps filled the throne room. But Pharaoh was not impressed. He called upon his magicians, and they too turned their staffs into snakes through their secret arts. It was an eerie sight, serpents slithering across the polished floors of Pharaoh's court. But then something astonishing happened. The serpent from Aaron's staff moved swiftly and devoured the other serpents. It was a clear sign. God's power was far greater than Egypt's sorcery, and yet Pharaoh remained unmoved. His heart grew harder. Instead of releasing the Israelites, he increased their suffering. He commanded his overseers to stop providing straw for making bricks, forcing the Hebrews to gather it themselves while still maintaining their daily quotas. The people, once hopeful, turned against Moses. "You have made us a stench to Pharaoh. You have put a sword in his hand to kill us." Moses, disheartened, cried out to God, "Why have you brought trouble on this people? Why did you send me?" It seemed like things were getting worse, not better, but God had a plan. And what was about to unfold would not only break Pharaoh's defiance, but would become one of the most dramatic demonstrations of divine power in all of history. The battle had begun, and Pharaoh had no idea what was coming. Pharaoh's defiance had set the stage for one of the most terrifying displays of divine power the world had ever seen. God had warned that Egypt would suffer if Pharaoh refused to release his people. Now, judgment was coming. One by one, the plagues would fall, each more devastating than the last, shaking the foundations of the empire and proving that the gods of Egypt were powerless before the Almighty. The first sign came suddenly. Moses, standing by the banks of the Nile, raised his staff and struck the water. Instantly the river turned to blood. The lifeblood of Egypt, its source of sustenance, trade, and daily survival, was now undrinkable. Fish floated lifelessly to the surface. The stench filled the air, yet Pharaoh remained unmoved. His magicians, using dark arts, mimicked the miracle. Pharaoh's heart hardened, and he refused to let Israel go. Then came the frogs, not just a few, millions. They emerged from the Nile, infesting homes, beds, ovens, and streets. The croaking was deafening. No one could escape them. In desperation, Pharaoh pleaded with Moses to pray for their removal. But as soon as the frogs were gone, he changed his mind. Next, the dust of the earth was turned into gnats, tiny, biting insects that swarmed humans and animals alike. Pharaoh's magicians tried to replicate the miracle, but failed. "This is the finger of God," they admitted. But still, Pharaoh would not yield. Then a greater terror descended upon Egypt, swarms of flies. Thick clouds of them filled the air, covering people, food, and livestock. The land reeked of decay. Yet miraculously, Goshen, the land where the Israelites lived, remained untouched. It was a clear sign that the God of Israel was making a distinction between his people and the Egyptians, but Pharaoh's resistance persisted, and so the plagues escalated. A deadly pestilence wiped out Egypt's livestock, crippling its economy. Yet again, the animals of the Israelites were untouched. Then boils erupted on the skin of every Egyptian, from the highest noble to the lowest servant. The magicians, once so confident in their sorcery, were now covered in sores, unable to stand before Moses. Still, Pharaoh refused. And so God sent a storm unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. Hail mixed with fire rained down from the heavens, shattering trees, destroying crops, and devastating the land. Egypt's gods of weather and harvest were powerless to stop it. Pharaoh, Jachin, finally acknowledged his sin. But as soon as the storm ceased, he hardened his heart again. Then came the locusts. They swarmed in such numbers that they darkened the sky, devouring every plant, every remaining crop. Egypt was left in ruins. Food was scarce. Hunger gripped the nation. Still, Pharaoh would not let the people go, so God sent a darkness so thick it could be felt. For 3 days, Egypt was plunged into an unnatural night. No one could see, no one could move. Yet in Goshen the light remained. Israel was safe, but Pharaoh's heart remained unyielding. One final plague would break him. A plague so devastating, so personal, that Egypt would beg for Israel's departure. The death of the firstborn was coming. Pharaoh had resisted God's will for too long. Now he was about to experience the full weight of divine judgment. The night had fallen upon Egypt, but this would not be an ordinary night. It would be a night of sorrow, of anguish, of cries so loud they would shake the very foundations of the kingdom. For too long, Pharaoh had defied the will of God. He had witnessed the rivers turn to blood, his land devastated by plagues, his people suffering under the weight of divine wrath. Yet his heart remained hard as stone. But now everything was about to change. Moses had delivered the final warning. At midnight, the Lord will pass through Egypt, and every firstborn son, from the palace of Pharaoh to the humblest servant, Even the firstborn of the livestock will die. It was a decree that no army could fight against, no power could stop. God himself would walk through the land of Egypt. But for the Israelites, there was a way to be spared. The first Passover was instituted. Each family was to take a lamb, one without blemish, and sacrifice it. The blood of this lamb was to be spread upon the doorposts of their homes, a symbol, a mark of protection, a covenant between God and his people. For when the Lord passed through Egypt that night, he would see the blood and pass over those homes, sparing their firstborn. It was not just an act of deliverance, it was a foreshadowing of something much greater to come. And so, the Israelites prepared. Families gathered. The lambs were sacrificed, the blood was painted upon the doorposts. Inside, they ate in haste, unleavened bread and bitter herbs, as they awaited the coming of the Lord. Meanwhile, throughout the rest of Egypt, an eerie silence filled the air. None suspected that within mere hours, the greatest tragedy in Egyptian history would unfold. Then it happened. At the stroke of midnight, a presence moved through the land, a presence unseen yet unmistakable, a divine force, powerful and unstoppable. And as it passed, the firstborn of every household fell lifeless. From the grandest palace to the humblest hut, there was no escape. Pharaoh himself, who had been so proud, so unyielding, now awoke to a horror unlike anything he had ever known. His own son, his heir, was dead. The wails of grief erupted from the palace and echoed through the city streets. It was a sound Egypt had never heard before and would never forget. Panic spread. Mothers clutched their lifeless children. Fathers fell to their knees in anguish. The mighty empire of Egypt, once so strong, was now brought to its knees by the hand of the Almighty. Pharaoh, broken and defeated, sent for Moses and Aaron in the dead of night. His voice, once filled with arrogance and pride, was now weak and trembling. "Go," he commanded, "leave my people, take your flocks, your herds, and go. Serve your God as you have said, and bless me also." It was over. The Israelites, after centuries of slavery, were finally free. Pharaoh had tried to stand against God, but in the end he learned what all men must learn. No king, no empire, no earthly power can stand against the will of the Almighty. And so, the people of Israel gathered their belongings. The night was still dark, but for them a new dawn was about to begin. The Exodus was at hand. The silence of the night had been shattered by the cries of the Egyptians. Every household was mourning, every family touched by loss. Pharaoh had finally broken, his pride crushed, his resistance shattered. And now, after centuries of oppression, the children of Israel were walking out of Egypt. Can you imagine the scene? Hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps even millions moving as one. Families carrying everything they owned on their backs. Mothers holding their children close. Fathers leading the way. The elderly, the young, the strong, the weak, all leaving behind the only life they had ever known. But this wasn't just a crowd. This was a nation being born. The Israelites were not sneaking away in the night like fugitives. No, they were marching out in triumph, in broad daylight, as a people delivered by the hand of the Almighty. And they were not leaving empty-handed. God had ensured that Egypt itself would finance their departure. The very people who once enslaved them now begged them to leave, offering silver, gold, and fine garments. The wealth of Egypt was being placed in the hands of former slaves. It was a divine reversal, a sign that God was not just delivering them but restoring them. And so the great caravans stretched across the land. The roads that once echoed with the footsteps of beaten slaves now resounded with the march of a free people. The wilderness lay ahead, uncertain and vast. But they did not walk alone, for God himself led the way. A pillar of cloud rose in front of them during the day, guiding them step by step. And at night, that pillar became fire, burning bright, illuminating their path, filling them with awe. It was not just a sign, it was his presence. A reminder that the same God who broke the chains of Egypt would walk with them every step of the way. Imagine how they must have felt. Excitement, fear, hope, uncertainty. Could this really be happening? Could they truly be free? Some had been born into slavery. Others had grown old under the lash of Egyptian masters. But now, for the first time in their lives, they were walking toward a future that was their own. Yet, even in their joy, there must have been whispers of doubt. Where are we going? What will we eat? How will we survive? After all, freedom was new to them. They knew how to suffer, but did they know how to live? Still, they pressed forward, one step at a time, following the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. But as they journeyed back in Egypt, something was stirring. Pharaoh, once broken, was beginning to rise again. His grief was turning into rage, his regret into vengeance. And soon, the Israelites, this newly freed nation, would find themselves trapped between the Red Sea and the fury of the greatest army on earth. The impossible escape was about to begin. Imagine the scene. The Israelites have been marching for days. The excitement of their escape still lingers, but now exhaustion begins to set in. The sun blazes over the desert, the air is dry, and the journey feels endless. Yet there is hope. They are finally free. But then the landscape changes. The towering cliffs and rugged terrain narrow their path, funneling them toward a vast body of water, the Red Sea. At first it seems like a natural resting point, but something feels off. Suddenly, a distant noise breaks the desert silence. A low rumbling sound like a storm approaching, but it's not thunder, it's something worse. A scout rushes to Moses, breathless with panic. The Egyptians are coming. Pharaoh has changed his mind. His grief has turned into wrath, and his pride refuses to accept defeat. He has gathered his entire army, his best chariots, his most skilled warriors, and they are coming at full speed, their wheels kicking up clouds of dust, their swords ready to strike. The news spreads like wildfire through the Israelite camp. Terror grips the people. Their weary eyes turn toward the horizon, and what they see sends shivers down their spines. A massive army, countless in number, approaching fast. War horses galloping, spears glistening, the ground trembling beneath their charge. Panic erupts. The people turn to Moses, their fear overflowing into cries of desperation. Why did you bring us out here to die? Were there not enough graves in Egypt? Desperation, regret, anger. Their newfound freedom is crumbling before their eyes. They are trapped. Before them, the Red Sea, an impassable barrier. Behind them, the full force of the Egyptian military. There is no escape, no boats, no bridges, nowhere to run. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows over the encampment. The end seems inevitable. Some prepare to surrender. Others brace for the slaughter. But then, Moses steps forward. His face is calm, his eyes fixed on something unseen. He does not panic. He does not fear. He knows something they do not. With his staff in hand, he turns to the people and speaks. Do not be afraid, stand firm. You will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. The words hang in the air. A moment of silence, and then a command from heaven. Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Move on, into the sea. How? But Moses knows. The impossible is about to happen. The night has fallen, but there is no peace. The Israelites stand at the edge of the Red Sea, fear gripping their hearts. The sound of Pharaoh's army grows louder, chariots racing, metal clashing, voices shouting in the darkness. Their doom is imminent. But then, a shift in the atmosphere. Moses, standing tall, grips his staff and stretches his hands toward the sea. The wind begins to howl, swirling around them with an unnatural force. It grows stronger, fiercer, as if the very breath of God is sweeping across the waters. And then something impossible happens. The sea moves. Not like a wave, not like the tide, but as if an invisible hand is reaching down and splitting the water. A patter roar echoes through the night as massive walls of water rise on either side, towering like liquid mountains. The seabed, once hidden beneath the depths, is now visible, a dry path stretching into the unknown. Silence. The Israelites stand frozen, their eyes wide in disbelief. This isn't just an escape route, it's a miracle. The firelight from their torches flickers against the colossal walls of water. The sea, held back by an unseen force, defies every law of nature. Fish trapped mid-motion, swirling currents frozen in time. A pathway created by the hands of the Almighty, Moses turns to his people, his voice steady and filled with conviction. Move forward. For a moment, no one moves. Can they trust this? Can they step into the impossible? Then, the first steps are taken. One by one, they step onto the dry seabed. A mother clutching her child, a father guiding his family, elders leaning on their staffs. They walk, their footsteps hesitant at first, then bolder, until thousands are marching between the walls of water, moving toward salvation. Behind them, the fire of God, a pillar of flame, descends upon the Egyptian army. Blinding light, unbearable heat, chariots thrown into chaos. Pharaoh's men struggle to advance, their horses rearing in fear. It's as if heaven itself is waging war against them. And yet, Pharaoh does not retreat. His heart is hardened. He watches as the Israelites vanish into the sea's open path. And with a single motion of his hand, he commands his army forward. But what awaits them, because this is not just an escape. This is a divine setup, and the moment of judgment is coming. The Israelites are moving forward, their steps hurried but steady. A dry seabed beneath their feet, towering walls of water on either side. The impossible is happening. They are walking through the depths of the Red Sea. But behind them, the sound of war. The moment the fire that held them back lifts, Pharaoh's chariots surge forward. Horses rear and charge, their hooves pounding against the ground. The wheels of iron and gold rattle as the army barrels into the path God has created. Thousands of men, swords gleaming under the moonlight, faces hardened with determination. Pharaoh himself rides at the front, his eyes burning with fury. This is his moment, his chance to reclaim what he believes is his. The sea has parted, but to him it's nothing more than an opportunity to strike. The Israelites hear the sounds behind them, the shouts, the war cries, the thunder of hooves against the seabed. Fear spreads through the people. They are unarmed, defenseless. How can they outrun the might of Egypt? Some stumble. Others look back in terror. The young and the old press forward, desperation in every breath. But Moses does not falter. He grips his staff tighter, his eyes set ahead. This isn't over. This is a test of faith. The Egyptians race through the parted sea, but something is wrong. The ground that had been firm beneath the Israelites' feet turns to mud beneath the wheels of Pharaoh's chariots. Suddenly the wheels sink. The horses panic, their hooves getting stuck. Soldiers struggle, pulling at the reins, but the weight of their armor drags them down. Chariots tip over, men fall, chaos erupts. Screams fill the air as panic spreads through the ranks. The sea, which had opened in obedience to God's command, now begins to resist them. Some soldiers look around, their eyes widening in realization. This is no ordinary escape. This is a divine trap. But Pharaoh does not stop. His pride blinds him. His rage fuels him. He urges his men forward, refusing to accept defeat. Yet above him, unseen but present, the hand of God is moving. The final moment. Air's approaching, but will Pharaoh realize it before it's too late? The tension in the air is thick, suffocating. The Israelites have made it across, their feet finally touching the safety of the other shore. Their breaths are ragged, their bodies trembling from the sheer terror of what they've just experienced. But they are alive. Moses stands tall, gripping his staff with unwavering determination. His eyes remain fixed on the path behind him, on the advancing army of Pharaoh. The Egyptians, once so confident, are now in disarray. Their chariots are tangled, their horses panicked. Men shout, soldiers stumble, confusion spreads like wildfire. What once seemed like an easy pursuit is turning into a nightmare. And then the moment comes. Moses raises his staff once more. His face is resolute, his heart steady, and God moves. A powerful roar echoes through the heavens as the towering walls of water, held back by divine command, begin to tremble. A deep rumbling sound vibrates through the earth, and in an instant the waters collapse. The soldiers barely have time to react. The walls of water come crashing down with the force of 1,000 storms. Waves upon waves engulf the chariots, the horses, the warriors. Screams pierce the air, but they are quickly silenced by the thunderous sound of the sea reclaiming its place. Pharaoh's eyes widen in horror as he watches his mighty army, his pride, his power, being swallowed by the raging flood. The realization hits him like a strike of lightning. This isn't just a natural disaster. This is the hand of God. The very path that once opened as an escape for the Israelites has become a grave for the Egyptians. Warriors who moments ago marched with confidence are now flailing, drowning, disappearing beneath the merciless waves. The Israelites watch from the shore, stunned, breathless. What they are witnessing defies human understanding. And then, silence. Themwa. Sea settles, returning to its natural state as if nothing had ever happened. The mighty Egyptian army, once the terror of nations, is no more. A realization sweeps over the people. They have been saved not by their strength, not by their wisdom, but by the undeniable, unstoppable power of God. On the opposite shore, Pharaoh stands alone. His army, his kingdom's might, has been erased in mere moments. The weight of his arrogance crushes him. He had defied God, and he has lost everything. But the story is not over yet, because what comes next will change the hearts of the Israelites forever. The sound of the rushing waters fades into silence. The once towering walls of the Red Sea have returned to their natural state, as if nothing had ever happened. But for the Israelites, everything has changed. They stand on the far shore, their bodies still trembling, their hearts pounding in their chests. They are free, truly free, and they are alive. The impossible has happened before their very eyes. God has delivered them. For a long moment there are no words, only the sound of the wind over the waves, the heavy breaths of thousands of people still trying to process what they've just witnessed. But then, somewhere in the crowd, a voice rises. It's Miriam, the sister of Moses. She steps forward, her face radiant with joy, her hands lifting a tambourine, and then she begins to sing. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The words ignite something in the people, a fire, a realization, a joy too great to contain. Voices rise one after another until thousands are singing together, a chorus of victory, of gratitude, of unshakable faith. Moses joins them. His voice is strong, filled with awe and reverence. The Lord is my strength and my song, and he has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. The song sweeps through the crowd like a wave, filling every heart with renewed hope, renewed faith, renewed purpose. For the first time in their lives, they are not slaves. They are a people, a nation, God's chosen ones. But as the echoes of their celebration fade into the desert air, a new reality begins to settle in. The journey is far from over. The promised land still lies ahead, a land they have never seen, a destiny they have yet to claim. And between them and that future is a wilderness stretching as far as the eye can see. Moses looks out at the horizon, the vast unknown waiting before them. He knows this is only the beginning. There will be trials, there will be doubt. There will be moments when the people forget what they have witnessed today. But one thing is certain: the God who parted the sea, the God who brought them out of Egypt, is the same God who will lead them forward. The road ahead will not be easy. Faith will be tested, lessons will be learned. But they are no longer just former slaves fleeing from Pharaoh. They are God's people, walking into their destiny. And so, with songs of victory still ringing in the air, the people take their first steps into the unknown, toward the future God has prepared for them.